This is CNN Breaking News.
Hello and welcome back. I'm Suhav
And I'm Frank Desario.
In today's news, we'll bring you the details of Roosevelt's court packing plan, the extent of the New Deal in both the South and the West, and the recession.
We will also explore the Supreme Court case of the Scottsboro Boys and the swarm of the new media that has come to be in the past few years. This is The Era Tonight.
Roosevelt has recently expanded the use of the Federal Bureau of Reclamation, which will provide irrigation to farmers and their fields. In the South, the Tennessee Valley Authority aims to provide electricity to the masses, restore overused fields, and fight disease.
With the appointment of John Collier as the head of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, an attempt has been made to return native lands to their original inhabitants. Also, Roosevelt is in the midst of his court packing plan, in which he could potentially appoint 6 new Supreme Court justices. And finally, the Scottsboro Boys trial has reached a verdict. Since his inauguration, Roosevelt has succeeded in passing many acts of legislation known as his New Deal. With aim to recover from the Great Depression and prevent another from occurring, FDR has made movements towards stability and a better economy. In order to help farmers out west, the Bureau of Reclamation, which was created by the New Lands Reclamation Act of 1902, has increased its authority to control river systems by way of large dams. The Bureau was originally created to supply farms and ranches with irrigation, but has recently been involved with much larger projects.
The Hoover Dam, previously named the Boulder Dam, has used the power of the Colorado River to distribute water to the south of California, as well as to create electricity that can be distributed to the surrounding towns. Cheap electricity allowed and encouraged for increased manufacturing and industry in the area. The Central Valley Project dammed the Sacramento River and stored water in its reservoirs. These dams, as well as the Grand Coulee Dam, have established great federal power in the West. The federal power now have unprecedented control over irrigation, electricity, and the development of western cities.
Much of the land available out west has also been bought by the federal government in an attempt to slow agricultural production, raise crop prices, and recover from the Dust Bowl. Over the past couple years, in order to prevent overgrazing, the government has bought millions of cattle from farmers. Harold Ickes, the Secretary of the Interior, appointed Richard Rutledge as head of the U.S. Grazing Service, a service established from the act of the same name. The service restricted the use of government lands in grazing of cattle, which generally helped farmers, but was disliked by the Navajo tribes, who used public lands as grazing space for their sheep.
With much help from the government to help our own people live life comfortably in the West, we must not forget about the people who already live there, Native Americans. In the past, our relationship with them has not been friendly. The Bureau of Indian Affairs, or BIA, has been riddled with corruption. Its goal is to assimilate natives involved suppressing their own culture. In an attempt to turn over a new leaf of the organization, President Roosevelt has appointed John Collier, an outspoken critic of the Bureau, to head the operation. Collier has done much for ending the so-called assimilation. The BIA creates the Indian Reorganization Act, which has restored lands to tribal ownership and has granted tribes internal sovereignty. These actions are not supported by all the tribes, most notably the Navajo, who refused to ratify the IRA. The IRA has laid the foundation for cooperation between the government and natives in order to express native freedom.
The South, as you may know, has been suffering from depression for a long time now, since far before the Great Depression. Sharecroppers and tenants had lost their farms, and the South's speed of recovery had been dwindling behind the rest of the country. Similar to the efforts made in the West, the Tennessee Valley Authority, also known as the TVA, has been created to control flooding and hydroelectric power. Besides the building of dams, it has also been said that the TVA was planning to encourage economic development, restore fields, and fight malaria, a common disease plaguing the area. While it had good intentions, farmers believed it to have had the opposite effect on what was intended. Farmers are complaining about the negative effects, the soil erosion and the acid rain caused by coal-burning strip mining, as well as toxic sewage dumped in nearby rivers.
Now, for the pop culture segment of our show, we have James Sewell.
In this country full of hard times, people need an escape, a way to flee their problems and immerse themselves in an imaginary world. And it seems that people are doing just this. From the comfort of our homes, we can now hear anything and everything happening from all across the country. A recent study has shown that, on average, we spend 5 hours a day sitting next to the radio, cross-legged and eagerly listening to the riveting dramas, children's shows, or live sporting events. Current popular shows include children's Jack Armstrong and Flash Gordon, housewives soap operas The Romance of Helen Trent, and Young Witter Brown, and the hilarious, in my opinion, comedies of George Burns, Gracie Allen, and Jack Benny. We can listen to live events, as we learned in the horrific kidnapping of Charles Lindbergh's son, but we can also hear sporting events, such as the spectacular wins of boxer Joe Louis.
Louis measured him right to the body, a left hook to the jaw.
One of the most popular radio presenters, in my opinion, named the top radio personality of 1938, is Roosevelt himself. Throughout his presidency, he has participated in many, quote, fireside chats, where he discusses important issues and topics important to the people.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States. My friends, I want to talk for a few minutes with the people of the United States about banking.
Now, if you want to escape the confines of your home, you can go spend hours in a movie theater, surrounded by pitch black and immersed in the fantasies of the screen. After a brief news segment and possibly a cartoon, it would be time for the main feature. Popular movies of recent years, including the Marx Brothers comedy Duck Soup, any of Charlie Chaplin's works, and the children's movie The Three Little Pigs.
Who's afraid of the big bad wolf? Big bad wolf, big bad wolf. Who's afraid of the big bad wolf?
Big blockbusters have also been popular, such as the fantasy of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, the love story of Gone with the Wind,
Ashley, I've been looking for you everywhere.
or King Kong, which broke box office records by earning almost $90,000 on opening weekend. However, I believe that the new movie Wizard of Oz, which is set to be released next week, will beat King Kong's record. Movies, while constantly getting more sophisticated and visually impressive every day, also tend to grow more explicit. The general public can be influenced by motion pictures, as shown by the decrease in sales of undershirts after Clark Gable removed his own in the movie It Happened One Night. Gangster movies such as Scarface and Little Caesar have become increasingly violent.
Please. Hello, please. I can't hear what you say.
Provoking censorship from the film industry, as advocated for by the Roman Catholic Legion of Decency. Now to world culture, the Olympics. It was thought that Germany planned on using the Olympic Games as propaganda of the Nazi movement. Hitler has risen in power and scares begin to emerge. Many countries started boycotting participation all around the world, including Sweden, France, and even Great Britain. The United States was split on which position to take, torn over the Jewish population who opposed all participation in Berlin, and the African Americans who heavily opposed the boycotts, proposing that they could demonstrate the inferiority of the Aryan German athletes. The Germans came away with 89 medals to the United States' 56. Our very own Jesse Owens won 4 medals in the athletics chapter of the Olympics. Many were pleased with the hospitality and triumph of the Olympics, bringing Germany back on the global table. Now, back to Suhav and Frank with Roosevelt's court packing plan.
After his re-election, Roosevelt set out to fix the judicial branch. The Supreme Court had rejected some of FDR's New Deal legislation, ruling both the National Industry Recovery Act and Agricultural Adjustment Act unconstitutional. Roosevelt wanted to appoint 6 new justices, claiming those currently serving were old. People saw this as an attempt to overthrow the American constitutional system, and Congress rejected his proposal. His court packing plan failed, although he eventually got what he wanted. Many of the judges retired, and over the next 4 years, Roosevelt was able to appoint 7 associate justices, including notably Hugo Black, William O. Douglas, and Felix Frankfurter. He was able to appoint many judges, although in general his plan was seen as a failure, and according to the polls, the affair had hurt his political integrity.
Now let's talk about the recession. The current recession has led to unemployment everywhere. But the question is why? Believing we had escaped the majority of the Depression, FDR has decided to limit government spending. The problem is he did this too soon. Depression is still in our midst, and these measures are only making it worse. Unemployment has now raised up to 10.4 million, only 3 million shy of the unemployment levels back in 1933. Loans are also harder to come by, as the Federal Reserve Board has tightened credit. Many people are advocating many different solutions, but Roosevelt has chosen to rely on deficit spending. He has also focused on increasing militaristic preparedness, so it looks like the New Deal might be drawing to a close.
As Roosevelt's second term came to a close, there was a choice to be made. As we know, he chose to run for re-election. Influenced by the military advances of Adolf Hitler, Roosevelt chose to continue his run in the White House. His campaign centered on his expansion of military employment and the promise that young people would not be sent into foreign wars. He won the election over the Republican candidate Wendell Willkie, but only marginally. His victory was brought on by the general public support, as well as the New Deal coalition. His supporters consisting of African Americans, Northern Democrats, blue-collar workers, and women. His third term will be starting soon, the first time in America's history for any one man to accomplish such a feat.
Although the New Deal has improved the lives of many people, not all are receiving the full benefits of these programs. Many civilians are currently unaffected by the legislation for two main reasons. The New Deal legislation is drafted, signed, and implemented in Washington, D.C., meaning it is inherently federal law. The problem is that local government can, and often does, overrule federal law. In certain states, relief payments are divided out according to race, with Mexicans and Indians given the least. Often, especially in the south of the country, blacks are given smaller payments than whites. Sometimes the relief benefits of whites are greater than the regular wages of black employees.
Now with more on the Scottsboro trials, James Sewell.
The issue of racism, as well as the jurisdictions of federal and local government, have recently taken center stage in the case of the Scottsboro boys' trial. These 9 boys were thrown into the Scottsboro, Alabama jail after 2 white women, Victoria Price and Ruby Bates, claim they've been raped. Medical evidence has suggested otherwise, but within a fortnight, 8 out of the 9 boys have been convicted of rape and sentenced to death. Rallies of support by the public for the convicted were made all over the country. The Communist Party, an avid supporter for racial equality, campaigned for justice and donated money for the effort. The federal government intervened and proposed a new trial due to the fact that the previous jury consisted of no black jurors. However, 5 boys were still convicted and sent to jail. We do know that one of the boys, Haywood Patterson, has escaped, and the police are on the hunt for him. Hopefully the other 4 boys will be let out on parole, but that doesn't seem to be likely in the near future. African Americans were generally helped by New Deal legislation, although Roosevelt's stance on civil rights was based majoritively on political gains. To pass legislation, he needed support from Southern Democrats, which meant vetoing certain legislation. For example, he refused to pass an anti-lynching bill supported by Southern Democrats, knowing that he still wouldn't lose the black vote. Blacks did not turn against Roosevelt because his legislation generally benefited them. Many lived off their public works jobs created by the Works Progress administration. Public commitment to racial equality was prevalent throughout Roosevelt's administration, but most notably from his wife. Eleanor Roosevelt, the First Lady, has fought for social justice, advocating for the rights of women and African Americans. Now back to Frank and Suhav.
Roosevelt is a very loved president, but has been disliked at times. However, regardless of one's opinion on him, it is true that he is a personification of presidency. FDR has strengthened the position of the president, along with the federal government, by setting a new precedent for the government to provide relief and to protect the economy.
Unemployment has not ended, and it may be some time before that problem is fixed. But Roosevelt has saved millions, and continues to do so every day. He may have his critics, but he is our president, and what he has done for our country is matched by no other.
Thank you for watching The Era Tonight. I'm Frank Tesario.
And I'm Suhav Teja. Make sure to tune in next year to catch up on the news. From all of us here at CNN, good night.